On February 18, 1988, in a quiet corner of eastern France, Alexia Daval Eulot came into the world. The younger of two sisters, born into a family people in town didn't just know, they respected. Her mom, Isabelle Eulot, wasn't just any local official. She sat on the city council, sharp, composed, the kind of woman who could shut down a debate with one sentence. People listened when she talked. Her dad, Jean-Pierre, ran a small cafe. Not the bougie Instagram kind, the real-deal neighborhood spot. Espresso machine humming, old guys arguing about horse racing, tickets scattered across tables. It wasn't just a cafe, it was the hangout. Alexia and her older sister, Stephanie, grew up tight, like ride or die tight. Their house ran on structure. Respect your elders, work hard, don't cut corners. Integrity wasn't optional, it was expected. And Alexia? She soaked that up. She had this spark, lively, driven, always moving, but she wasn't reckless. She was focused. The type who'd lace up at dawn, chase her goals, and still show up for Sunday dinner on time. Her family saw big things in her. She had ambition, yeah, but she also had discipline. That combo? Dangerous in the best way. Now, Jonathan Daval, whole different vibe. Born January 16, 1984, in a small town called Eulot, he grew up in a crowded house. 6 kids. Not a lot of space, not a lot of noise about feelings either. His mom worked childcare. His dad worked factory shifts. Life wasn't flashy. It was grind now, rest later. Then, when Jonathan was 13, everything flipped. His dad dropped from a heart attack. Just like that. And something in Jonathan shut off. He didn't act out, didn't rebel, he just folded inward, got quiet, guarded. The kind of kid teachers describe as no trouble at all. But sometimes no trouble just means nobody's looking too close. Soccer became his outlet. The field was the one place he didn't feel invisible. For years he played amateur leagues, not chasing glory, just chasing connection. After high school, he pivoted to IT, structured, predictable, safe. At his tech consulting job, coworkers said the same thing about him over and over. Disciplined, reliable, detail-oriented. Never the loudest guy in the room, never the alpha, but dependable. That word would follow him for years. In the early 2000s, Jonathan met Alexia, and that's where things get interesting. She was bold, outgoing, confident. He was reserved, almost shy. But sometimes opposites don't just attract, they balance each other out. She pulled him outward. He grounded her. It was both of their first real, serious relationship. It moved slow, no whirlwind drama, just steady. Then, on July 18, 2015, they got married at the town hall in Gray. And here's the poetic twist. The ceremony was officiated by Alexia's mother, Isabelle Eulot, a city council member marrying her own daughter. Whole town watching. It was beautiful, symbolic, full circle. Afterward, they jetted off to the Pacific Islands for their honeymoon. Turquoise water, soft sand, sunset selfies, the whole dream sequence. When they came back, they moved into a house that had belonged to Alexia's grandparents, renovated it, repainted walls, new floors, fresh start. From the outside, picture perfect. They worked out together, ate clean, ran races, posted smiling photos, the couple that looks locked in. But here's the thing about social media smiles and neighborhood gossip. You never see the cracks forming underneath. They were struggling to have a child. And that pressure, it doesn't just sit quietly in the corner. It creeps in. It amplifies insecurities. It tests patience. It magnifies every little difference between two people. Jonathan, who had always carried quiet insecurities from his childhood, started feeling the weight. He wasn't loud about it. He didn't argue. He didn't explode. He internalized. And sometimes the most dangerous storms are the ones that never make a sound. To friends and coworkers, he was the same guy. Calm, structured, avoided conflict, but internally, things were shifting. Old wounds, masculinity questions, self-worth battles. Alexia, meanwhile, kept moving forward, running, planning, living. And then came Saturday, October 28, 2017. It started like any other weekend morning. Around 9 a.m., Alexia laced up her running shoes. Crisp autumn air, quiet streets. She stepped out of the door in her workout gear like she'd done countless times before. No drama, no warning, just another jog. But sometimes the most ordinary mornings are the ones that split life into before and after. And by the end of that day, everything people thought they knew about that stable, healthy, perfect marriage would be shattered. And the question wouldn't just be what happened. It would be, how well do we ever really know the person sleeping next to us? That Saturday morning felt normal. Too normal. Alexia stepped out into the cool autumn air and headed toward the wooded trails around Gray, the same trails she'd run 100 times before. She knew every bend, every incline, every patch where the gravel got loose. This wasn't a spontaneous adventure. This was routine, muscle memory. Back at the house, Jonathan later said he went about his day like usual, drove to work, clocked in at the tech office, sat at his desk, answered emails. If anyone noticed him, they didn't see panic, they didn't see chaos, just the same quiet, dependable guy. Hours passed, and then something started to feel off. Alexia's runs rarely went longer than 90 minutes. By lunchtime, she should have been home, showered, maybe making something light to eat, but the house was still empty. Jonathan called her cell, straight to voicemail. He called again, voicemail. He tried the home line, nothing. Now the air changes in the room. That subtle shift from she's probably fine to, okay, wait, this isn't right. As his concern ramped up, he reached out to family. The first call went to Gregory Gay, Stephanie's husband. Jonathan told him Alexia hadn't come back and wasn't answering her phone. For the family, that wasn't just unusual, that was red flag territory. Alexia didn't ghost people. She didn't just disappear. If she was running late, she'd text. Always. No one waited around for sirens. Jonathan and Gregory jumped in a car and started retracing her usual jogging route. They drove slow along the roadside, scanned tree lines, pulled over to check ditches, ravines, trailheads, calling her phone the whole time. Still voicemail. At first, maybe you think, twisted ankle, minor fall, maybe she dropped her phone. But as the hours dragged on, the maybes got darker. They called local hospitals, emergency rooms, clinics. Has anyone been admitted this morning matching her description? Every answer was the same. No. By evening, hope was thinning out. This wasn't just a late run anymore. Jonathan went to the local police station in person, sat down with officers, gave a full statement. He laid it all out. The time she left, what she was wearing, her route, the fact that she didn't have her phone or ID with her. That last detail hit hard. Because Alexia was organized, responsible, the type who double-checks everything before leaving the house. Police logged the report, missing person. At first, they worked through the standard checklist. Accident? Maybe she slipped somewhere hard to access. Maybe she got injured off trail. They even considered whether she left voluntarily, but that theory didn't stick. Nothing about Alexia's life suggested she'd just vanish. She had plans, family ties, races coming up, goals. Then came the real problem. There was no evidence. No dropped phone, no abandoned jacket, no witness saying they saw her arguing with someone, no sign of a struggle, just nothing. And sometimes nothing is the most unsettling clue of all. As Sunday rolled on, friends and family clung to that thin thread of hope. Maybe she got disoriented, maybe she'd show up embarrassed, apologizing for the scare. But deep down, they knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a minor delay. This was a disappearance. And it wasn't staying quiet. Word spread fast. A young woman missing from her morning run? That story doesn't stay local. Soon the case was drawing attention beyond Gray. Social media posts, community search efforts, volunteers scanning woods and fields. The private nightmare of one family was becoming public. Then Monday morning came, October 30th, 2017, and the search ended. In a wooded area near Gray, in the Oat Town Department, someone made a discovery. It wasn't near the main trail, not where joggers usually passed. This was deeper in, overgrown, uneven ground, the kind of place you don't just wander into by accident. Officers arriving on scene immediately sensed it. The body had been partially covered with branches and leaves, not naturally, placed. And in that moment, everything shifted. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't someone lost in the woods. This was deliberate. The wooded stillness that once felt peaceful now felt suffocating, controlled, intentional. Investigators secured the area. The realization settled in heavy. This case had just transformed from a missing persons report into a homicide investigation. The woman who left her house in running shoes on a crisp Saturday morning wasn't coming home. And now the question wasn't just what happened on the trail. It became something far more chilling. If this wasn't random, then who knew her routine? Who knew those woods? And who had something to gain from her never coming back? The answers, as it turned out, weren't hiding in the forest. They were much closer to home. What investigators saw in that wooded clearing wasn't just tragic, it was staged. Branches and leaves had been thrown over the body, not carefully arranged, not thoughtfully hidden. It looked rushed, sloppy, like someone had panicked halfway through and dipped out. And then there was the fire. There were visible burn marks on Alexia's body and on her clothing. Not enough to fully destroy evidence, not enough to reduce everything to ash, just enough to show intent. Someone had tried to set her on fire, but they hadn't finished the job. Forensic specialists moved in immediately, cameras clicking, evidence markers placed, gloves on, quiet voices, bruises, blunt force trauma, soft tissue damage, and then the detail that changed everything. Clear signs of strangulation around her neck. This wasn't a fall, this wasn't an accident, this wasn't natural causes, this was violent. By the time formal identification was complete, the truth hit like a freight train. The body in that wooded clearing was Alexia Daval, 29 years old, missing for just 2 days. For her family, hope didn't fade, it collapsed. The tiny sliver of possibility they'd been holding on to snapped. And in a small town like Gray, news doesn't travel, it explodes. Within hours, everyone knew. This wasn't a place where murders happened. People left doors unlocked. Kids rode bikes without parents hovering. Morning jogs were routine, not risky. Now, fear crept in. Local news outlets jumped on the story. Regional papers, online blogs, TV crews. The headline wrote itself. Young woman found dead after going for morning run. Speculation spread even faster than facts. The random attacker theory surfaced almost immediately. Commentators floated the idea of a predator lurking in the woods. Some even whispered about a potential serial pattern. No evidence, just fear filling in blanks. On social media, it was chaos. Rumors, amateur detectives, screenshots, wild theories. And the wooded area where Alexia was found, once considered peaceful, suddenly felt sinister. That trail had been a go-to spot. Runners, dog walkers, families, cyclists. It was woven into daily life. After Monday, women who used to run alone at sunrise started texting friends before stepping outside. Some stopped going altogether. Because now, there was a new question hanging in the air. What if it wasn't random? At coffee shops, in offices, around dinner tables, one idea kept resurfacing. What if the threat wasn't a stranger passing through? What if it was someone local? That thought hit different. Because a stranger you can blame on bad luck, but someone from the area, someone familiar with those woods, someone who knew the trails well enough to choose a hidden, uneven clearing off the main path, that's personal. The evidence of fire became a major turning point in the investigation. Forensics didn't see rage, they saw calculation. Fire isn't instinctive, it's strategic. It suggested someone tried to destroy DNA, erase fibers, blur the cause of death. This wasn't just violence, this was an attempted cleanup. And that changes the profile. When police officially reclassified the case from a missing person to a homicide, everything escalated.
More units, more personnel. The wooded area became a grid of methodical searching. Officers combed through dirt and brush inch by inch. They looked for cigarette butts, fabric fragments, shoe impressions, anything that didn't belong in that forest. They cataloged everything. Every tiny object had potential. Investigators worked through scenarios. Was it a random encounter? Did someone cross paths with her mid-run and things spiraled? Was she followed? Targeted? The early working theory leaned toward an external attack, an unknown assailant. The scene, the violence, the attempt to burn the body, the secluded location all pointed to someone trying to escape detection. But there was something about it that didn't fully sit right. The concealment was rushed, the burning incomplete, the body not transported far. It didn't feel like a polished criminal mastermind. It felt messy. And when cases feel messy, detectives start asking a different question. Not just who could have done this, but who would panic like that? Who would know the trails but not plan well enough to cover everything? Who would have access, opportunity, and something personal at stake? Because statistically speaking, violence against women often isn't random. And as investigators quietly widened their lens beyond the woods and into Alexia's personal life, the narrative started shifting. The forest may have been the crime scene, but the motive? That was likely rooted somewhere much closer to home. By the time the case officially became a homicide investigation, the pressure was unreal. Gray wasn't built for this. This was the kind of town where people worried about parking tickets, not murder investigations. Now, every street corner felt different. Every wooded trail looked suspicious. Local media camped outside buildings. Residents demanded answers. Fear crept in slow but steady. Women who used to run solo at sunrise now moved in packs. Parents started double-checking curfews. Group chats lit up with "text me when you get home." That hopeful phase, the "maybe she'll come back" stage, was over. This was murder. And now the spotlight turned toward the family. Funeral arrangements, memorial services, public tributes. The town showed up. At the center of it all stood Jonathan Daval. He stayed close to Alexia's parents, Isabelle and Jean-Pierre. Cameras caught every frame, him standing beside them, head bowed, shoulders slightly slumped. The grieving husband, the shattered son-in-law. Reporters described him the same way over and over. Quiet, composed, reserved. He didn't rage, he didn't break down publicly. His grief looked contained, controlled, and somehow that made it feel more genuine to people. When he spoke, he talked about Alexia's energy, her discipline, her love of running. He called her his strength. His voice stayed low, measured. On November 5, 2017, about 10,000 people showed up for a memorial march. 10,000. For a town that size, that's massive. The procession moved in silence. White flowers, photos of Alexia held high, a wave of shared sorrow stretching through the streets.
Jonathan walked at the very front, right beside her parents. Visually, it was powerful, the image of unity, a family standing together against tragedy. When the march ended, speeches followed. Isabelle described her daughter as strong, intelligent, driven. Jean-Pierre thanked the community for their support. Then, Jonathan stepped forward. Cameras zoomed in. His speech aired across multiple networks. He called Alexia his oxygen, his reason, his motivation. He spoke about love, about losing his foundation, about not knowing how to move forward without her. People cried. Headlines the next morning framed him as the face of grief. Newspapers ran front-page photos. Devoted husband leads town in mourning. To the public, Jonathan looked like the perfect husband, broken but dignified, a man navigating unimaginable loss with quiet strength. But while the media amplified that image, investigators were doing something else. They were starting with the basics. And in cases like this, the first rule is simple. Look at the spouse. It's not personal. It's procedure. Only days after Alexia's body was found, Jonathan found himself sitting across from detectives.
At first, his statements were clean. He said he'd been at work that Saturday from around 10:30 a.m. repairing a printer. He insisted he had no idea what happened after Alexia left for her run. He seemed cooperative, calm. But calm doesn't equal consistent. As detectives dug deeper, cracks started forming. Timeline discrepancies, small contradictions about the order of events, details that didn't quite line up the same way twice. And then there were the injuries. Investigators noticed scratches on his neck and chest, bite marks on his arms. That's not something you ignore in a strangulation case. When confronted, Jonathan said he and Alexia had argued the night before she disappeared. He downplayed it, said it was brief, heated maybe, but nothing serious, no lasting impact, just a couple arguing. But those injuries? They didn't look like minor couple scuffles. They looked defensive, like someone had been fighting back. And here's the thing about strangulation victims. They claw, they scratch, they grab at whatever they can reach. Neck, chest, arms. Exactly where Jonathan had marks. Now the narrative that the public had embraced, grieving husband, emotional widower, started to feel less solid under investigative light. Detectives weren't swayed by speeches or memorial marches. They focused on facts. Why did his timeline shift? Why did his injuries match the kind of wounds someone would get during a violent struggle? Why did the attempt to burn the body look rushed? And most importantly, if this was a random predator in the woods, why was the husband the one with defensive wounds? The investigation was no longer just about a possible stranger lurking on a trail. It was circling inward, and slowly, quietly, the image of Jonathan Daval began to change. Not in public yet, but inside the interrogation room, the tone was shifting. Because sometimes the person leading the march is the one everyone should have been watching all along. The deeper investigators looked, the worse it got. Jonathan's alibi? On paper, it sounded solid. Yes, he had been at the office that Saturday. Co-workers confirmed seeing him. Surveillance showed him entering. But here's the problem. No one could say exactly how long he stayed. The footage didn't cover every minute. Witnesses couldn't lock down the timeline. There were gaps. And in a homicide case, gaps are everything. Instead of clearing him, his alibi started raising eyebrows. Then detectives searched the house. Not a casual walkthrough, a full forensic sweep. Floors, laundry, trash, bedding, every textile examined under lab conditions. And that's when they found it. The sheet used to partially cover Alexia's body in the woods matched a set from their home. Same fabric, same pattern, same origin. That wasn't coincidence. That was connection. Suddenly, the theory shifted. Maybe the woods weren't the primary crime scene. Maybe the violence happened inside the house, and the forest, just a dump site. Then came the vehicle. Jonathan drove a company car, and it had GPS tracking. Investigators pulled the data. The car had been near the wooded area where Alexia's body was found during the night of October 27th into the 28th. That detail alone was heavy, but it didn't stop there. Tire impressions at the scene?
Jonathan walked at the very front, right beside her parents. Visually, it was powerful, the image of unity, a family standing together against tragedy. When the march ended, speeches followed. Isabelle described her daughter as strong, intelligent, driven. Jean-Pierre thanked the community for their support. Then, Jonathan stepped forward. Cameras zoomed in. His speech aired across multiple networks. He called Alexia his oxygen, his reason, his motivation. He spoke about love, about losing his foundation, about not knowing how to move forward without her. People cried. Headlines the next morning framed him as the face of grief. Newspapers ran front-page photos, devoted husband leads town in mourning. To the public, Jonathan looked like the perfect husband, broken but dignified, a man navigating unimaginable loss with quiet strength. But while the media amplified that image, investigators were doing something else. They were starting with the basics.
And in cases like this, the first rule is simple. Look at the spouse. It's not personal, it's procedure. Only days after Alexia's body was found, Jonathan found himself sitting across from detectives. At first, his statements were clean. He said he'd been at work that Saturday from around 10:30 a.m. repairing a printer. He insisted he had no idea what happened after Alexia left for her run. He seemed cooperative, calm, but calm doesn't equal consistent. As detectives dug deeper, cracks started forming. Timeline discrepancies, small contradictions about the order of events, details that didn't quite line up the same way twice. And then there were the injuries. Investigators noticed scratches on his neck and chest, bite marks on his arms. That's not something you ignore in a strangulation case. When confronted, Jonathan said he and Alexia had argued the night before she disappeared. He downplayed it, said it was brief, heated maybe, but nothing serious, no lasting impact, just a couple arguing. But those injuries? They didn't look like minor couple scuffles. They looked defensive, like someone had been fighting back. And here's the thing about strangulation victims. They claw, they scratch, they grab at whatever they can reach. Neck, chest, arms, exactly where Jonathan had marks. Now the narrative that the public had embraced, grieving husband, emotional widower, started to feel less solid under investigative light. Detectives weren't swayed by speeches or memorial marches. They focused on facts. Why did his timeline shift? Why did his injuries match the kind of wounds someone would get during a violent struggle? Why did the attempt to burn the body look rushed? And most importantly, if this was a random predator in the woods, why was the husband the one with defensive wounds? The investigation was no longer just about a possible stranger lurking on a trail. It was circling inward. And slowly, quietly, the image of Jonathan Daval began to change. Not in public yet, but inside the interrogation room, the tone was shifting. Because sometimes the person leading the march is the one everyone should have been watching all along. The deeper investigators looked, the worse it got. Jonathan's alibi? On paper, it sounded solid. Yes, he had been at the office that Saturday. Co-workers confirmed seeing him. Surveillance showed him entering. But here's the problem. No one could say exactly how long he stayed. The footage didn't cover every minute. Witnesses couldn't lock down the timeline. There were gaps. And in a homicide case, gaps are everything. Instead of clearing him, his alibi started raising eyebrows. Then, detectives searched the house. Not a casual walkthrough, a full forensic sweep. Floors, laundry, trash, bedding, every textile examined under lab conditions. And that's when they found it. The sheet used to partially cover Alexia's body in the woods matched a set from their home. Same fabric, same pattern, same origin. That wasn't coincidence, that was connection. Suddenly the theory shifted. Maybe the woods weren't the primary crime scene. Maybe the violence happened inside the house, and the forest, just a dump site. Then came the vehicle. Jonathan drove a company car, and it had GPS tracking. Investigators pulled the data. The car was near the wooded area where Alexia's body was found during the night of October 28th into the 29th. That detail alone was heavy. But it didn't stop there. Tire impressions at the scene? They matched the tread pattern of his vehicle, exactly. At this point, the grieving husband image and the forensic reality were on two completely different tracks. Publicly, Jonathan still looked composed, still soft-spoken, still devastated. But in the interrogation room, the pressure was building. At first, he flat-out denied using his vehicle that night, said he hadn't left. But cell tower data told another story. Surveillance footage from surrounding roads contradicted him. Eyewitness accounts placed his car in motion. For investigators, this was the turning point. His version of events wasn't just fuzzy, it was false. Still, detectives didn't rush. They continued gathering evidence, interviewing, cross-checking, considering every angle, even the possibility of a third party. But everything kept circling back to one person, Jonathan. As more evidence surfaced, something else changed. His strategy. He shifted. During interrogations, he moved from full denial to subtle deflection. Then, in January 2018, he dropped a bomb. He accused his brother-in-law, Gregory Gay, of killing Alexia, and he didn't stop there. He claimed Alexia's parents, Isabel and Jean-Pierre, and her sister Stephanie knew about it. He suggested a cover-up. It was a wild accusation, and it directly contradicted his earlier statements. For the Fouliot family, it was devastating. They had stood beside him at memorials, embraced him, mourned with him. Now he was pointing at them. Public reaction was immediate. The man once portrayed as grief-stricken and noble was now accusing the victim's family of conspiracy. Investigators, however, stayed grounded. There was no forensic evidence linking Gregory to the crime. None. Every physical and circumstantial indicator still pointed towards Jonathan. Detectives saw his accusations for what they likely were: a pressure valve, a way to stall, to direct, to buy time. To better understand his behavior, specialists were brought in. Psychiatrists, psychologists. Their assessments painted a complicated picture. A man with low self-worth, emotional suppression, deep insecurity. Someone who avoided confrontation publicly, but under intense private stress could explode. They described bursts of aggression beneath a quiet exterior, a pattern of bottling things up until they detonated. They also noted his psychological dependence on his mother and difficulty making independent decisions. Outwardly passive, internally volatile. That profile explained his shifting narrative. Throughout 2018, Jonathan's stance became erratic. He would partially admit involvement, then retract, blame Gregory again, then circle back. Investigators saw a tactic, confusion as strategy. But to Alexia's family, it felt like betrayal layered on top of loss. Then came November 23, 2018. For the first time, Jonathan acknowledged direct responsibility. He said that during the night of October 28th, an argument escalated. According to him, it started over intimacy. He claimed Alexia refused. Voices rose, shoving began, and then, he said, he lost control. He admitted strangling her. It was his first official confession.
But even that didn't stick. Days later, during December hearings, he backtracked again, blamed Gregory, rewrote the narrative. It was whiplash. Then, on December 7, 2018, a face-to-face meeting was arranged between Jonathan and the Foulot family. Tension filled the room. At one point, Alexia's mother presented him with a photograph of her daughter, and something broke. Jonathan stopped deflecting, stopped redirecting, and acknowledged that he alone was responsible. Still, investigators needed clarity. On June 17, 2019, they conducted a full reconstruction. Early morning, same lighting conditions, same environment. Jonathan walked them through it step by step. He admitted striking Alexia between 5 and 10 times in the face, then strangling her with his hands. After realizing what he'd done, he said he transported her body to the woods, attempted to burn it, tried to erase evidence. That reconstruction changed everything. Before, he'd painted it as a tragic loss of control, a sudden, explosive accident. But the sequence, the blows, the strangulation, the transport, the fire attempt, showed something else. Not just rage, action, decision, concealment. It wasn't one impulsive second, it was a chain of deliberate choices. And once those pieces were laid out in order, the image of a shattered husband fully collapsed. What remained was a man who had stood at the front of a 10,000-person memorial march while knowing exactly what happened that night. What investigators ultimately laid out wasn't a single flash of anger. It was a chain: assault, strangulation, transporting the body, trying to burn it. Each step required a decision. Each decision required thought. By the summer of 2019, psychological evaluations were added to the case file.
Specialists diagnosed Jonathan with a personality disorder marked with obsessive traits, a need for control, and rigid, ritualistic patterns. Experts also pointed to deep insecurities, including issues of sexual inadequacy that had created serious tension in the marriage. Alexia wanted a child, badly. Text messages between them revealed the strain. She pushed him to seek medical help. He accused her of being demanding. The topic kept coming back, and every time it did, it chipped away at him. To investigators, this wasn't about one argument. It was pressure building for years. By the end of 2019, Jonathan's defense was basically done. The reenactment, the GPS data, the bedsheet, the injuries, his own shifting confessions. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was intentional. The trial. In November 2020, Jonathan Daval went on trial. It wasn't a normal courtroom scene. Public health restrictions were in place. Plexiglass barriers stood between people. Seats were spaced apart. The atmosphere felt tense even before testimony began. The jury, 6 people, 5 women, 1 man. From the first day, the charge was clear: intentional killing of a spouse. The presiding judge methodically reviewed the investigation. One by one, he walked through Jonathan's evolving stories: the denial, the accusations against his brother-in-law, the confession, the reversal, the reconstruction. Jonathan admitted responsibility for her death, but he still framed it as a fight that spiraled out of control. Then the experts took the stand. The forensic pathologist described Alexia's injuries in clinical detail: the blows to her face, the marks on her neck, the absence of any sexual assault after death, the suffocation. Psychiatrists testified that Jonathan was not legally insane. He knew what he was doing. He understood the consequences. Yes, he had personality disorders. Yes, he had emotional repression. Yes, he had low self-esteem. But none of that removed intent. By the second day, Alexia's parents spoke. They didn't shout. They didn't rage. They asked for clarity. They wanted to understand why. When Jonathan took the stand, he initially became physically ill. Proceedings paused, then resumed. Under questioning, he admitted something chilling. He knew, while tightening his hands around her neck, that it could kill her. That detail cut through everything. The defense argued there was no premeditation, just an explosion during a marital dispute, a tragic loss of control. Witnesses described their personalities: Alexia, energetic, strong-willed; Jonathan, reserved, avoidant; tension over fertility struggles, communication breakdown. The court acknowledged those dynamics, but it repeated one point over and over: nothing justified what happened next. Not the strangulation, not the transport of her body, not the attempt to burn it. The breaking point. By the final hearing, the emotional weight in the courtroom was heavy. Alexia's mother, Isabel, stood once more and asked him to recount everything, step by step, no gaps, no edits. Jonathan fell to his knees. He asked for forgiveness, but he didn't offer anything new. No deeper explanation, no final truth beyond what was already proven. The prosecution demanded a severe sentence, emphasizing the deliberate concealment and the violence involved. Alexia's family did not ask for the maximum. They asked for acknowledgement. On November 21, 2020, the verdict came down. Guilty. Intentional killing of a spouse. Jonathan Daval was sentenced to 25 years in prison with a mandatory minimum of 12.5 years before eligibility for early release. He did not appeal. He was taken into custody immediately. The criminal case was over. The town of Gray finally had its answer. Aftermath. Following the criminal trial, civil proceedings followed. Alexia's parents sought compensation for emotional suffering and material damages. Their initial request was nearly €379,000. The defense pushed back, calling it excessive. Negotiations continued. In June 2022, the Court of Appeals upheld Jonathan's conviction and set compensation at €160,000. Legally, that closed the chapter. Emotionally, that's different. The Eulot family eventually chose to leave behind spaces tied too closely to memory. The house, the routines, the places that once felt ordinary but now carried weight. The wooded trails around Gray still exist. People still run there. But for many, they never feel quite the same. Because this case wasn't about a stranger in the dark. It wasn't about a mysterious predator hiding in the forest. It was about a marriage unraveling behind closed doors. It was about control, insecurity, pride, and the terrifying moment when suppressed anger turns lethal. And maybe the hardest truth of all, the man who led the memorial march, the man who stood at the front holding white flowers, the man who called her his oxygen, he knew from the very beginning. If stories like this remind you of anything, it's this. Pay attention to patterns, to pressure, to silence that feels too controlled. Because sometimes the most dangerous storms don't make noise until it's way too late. Until next time, stay sharp, stay aware.